The silence of Alaska is different from any other silence in the world. It's a silence so deep, so absolute, that you can hear the beating of your own heart echoing in your ears. But that silence, on the afternoon of September 15th, 2022, was shattered by a sound no parent should ever hear, the scream of terror from a 3-year-old boy, and the roar of a 450-pound grizzly bear determined to kill. What happened in the next 7 minutes in Alaska's Chugach Mountains would defy everything animal behavior experts believed they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a child and his dog. This is the story of Thomas Miller, 3 years old, and Kodiak, an 8-year-old Alaskan Malamute who made a decision that would forever change our understanding of how far an animal's love for his family can go. It was 3:42 in the afternoon when Robert Miller heard the scream. He was 150 meters away, checking the wildlife photography traps he'd installed that morning near his cabin on the outskirts of Anchorage. His wife, Sarah, was inside preparing dinner, and his son Thomas, his little 3-year-old boy with blonde hair and bright blue eyes that always wanted to explore the world, was supposedly playing on the back porch under Kodiak's watch. Kodiak, their 8-year-old Malamute, 90 pounds of muscle and grey and white fur, had been Thomas's personal guardian since the day the boy was born. Where Thomas went, Kodiak went. They were inseparable in a way that even Robert, a wildlife veterinarian with 30 years of experience, found extraordinary. But in that moment, when he heard that shrill scream of pure terror, Robert felt his blood freeze, because he recognized the second sound that followed. The deep, guttural roar of a grizzly bear, and he knew with the terrible certainty only a parent can feel that his son was in mortal danger. He ran. He ran faster than he'd run in his entire life, his boots pounding the ground covered with pine needles, his hunting rifle bouncing against his back, his lungs burning from the effort. 150 meters. On flat ground, maybe 20 seconds for a man in shape. But this was Alaska. This was uneven terrain, exposed roots, loose rocks, uphill slope. It took him 45 seconds that felt like 45 years. And when he reached the clearing behind his cabin, what he saw would mark him forever. A male grizzly bear, probably 450 pounds based on his massive size, was 3 meters from Thomas. His son had fallen, probably tripped while running, and was on the ground looking up at the bear, with eyes so wide Robert could see them from where he stood. The bear rose up on his hind legs, a display of dominance and threat. His 4-inch claws extended, his mouth open showing teeth designed to tear flesh. He was going to attack. Robert knew it. All his training, all his experience screamed at him that he had maybe 2 seconds before that bear fell on his son. But then he saw Kodiak. The Malamute had placed his body directly between Thomas and the bear. He wasn't barking frantically like most dogs do when they're scared. He was still, his posture low, his tail straight, his eyes fixed on the bear with an intensity Robert had never seen in him. And then Kodiak did something that would make wildlife biologists around the world question everything they thought they knew about canine behavior. Kodiak attacked. A 90-pound Malamute attacked a 450-pound grizzly. Not to flee afterward, not as a distraction. He attacked with the clear, undeniable intention of fighting to the death, if necessary, because between that bear and the 3-year-old boy Kodiak had cared for since he was a baby, there was no choice. There was only duty. There was only love. There was only a silent promise Kodiak had made 8 years ago and was about to fulfill with his life. Before continuing with this story that will break your heart, but also restore your faith in the nobility of the animal spirit, I need you to do something for me. Go down to the comments right now and tell me what country and city you're watching from. I want to know how far Thomas's story reaches, Kodiak and the most heroic sacrifice ever documented between a dog and the child he loved. If this content is moving you, consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. Every donation helps us continue bringing real stories that prove true love, unbreakable loyalty, and the purest heroism No species barriers. Now, yes, let's return to that clearing in Alaska and to the 7 minutes that would change everything. To fully understand what happened that day, we need to go back 8 years. We need to understand who Kodiak was, who the Miller family was, and why they lived in one of the most remote and dangerous places in the United States. Robert Miller had grown up in Seattle, Washington. Son of a biology professor and a nurse, he always knew his life would be connected with animals. He studied veterinary medicine at the University of Washington, specialized in wildlife, and spent his 20s working for the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. He met Sarah when he was 29. She was a nature photographer, had come to document the salmon migration in Alaska, and Robert was her assigned guide. They fell in love in the middle of the most beautiful wilderness on the planet. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony in Seward, Alaska, with only 12 guests and a pack of bald eagles as involuntary witnesses. They decided to settle on the outskirts of Anchorage, not in the city itself. That would have been too civilized for two souls who loved the wild. They bought 40 acres of boreal forest 20 miles east of Anchorage, built a log cabin with their own hands over 2 summers, and created what they both called their piece of paradise. They had electricity from solar panels and a backup generator. They had water from a natural stream Robert had purified and channeled. They had satellite internet that worked when it wanted to, which was approximately 60% of the time. And they had the privacy, peace, and connection with nature both needed to feel complete. But living in Alaska isn't like living anywhere else. Alaska doesn't forgive mistakes. Alaska has no patience with naivety or lack of preparation. And Alaska is full of bears. Black bears, which are generally shy, and grizzly bears, which definitely are not. Robert knew the risks. He'd studied bears throughout his entire career. He knew that encounters between humans and grizzly bears could end in tragedy if not handled correctly. He knew he needed protection, not just weapons, though he always carried his rifle when he went out. He needed something more. He needed a dog, but not just any dog. He needed a dog bred specifically for Alaska's conditions, a dog that could handle temperatures of -40 degrees in winter. A dog with protective instincts, but also the intelligence to know when to fight and when to flee. A dog that was, above all, loyal to his family unto death. There was only one breed that met all those criteria: the Alaskan Malamute, the oldest sled dog breed in North America, bred by the MALAMUTE people of Alaska more than 4,000 years ago. Designed to pull heavy loads across long distances in the most brutal conditions on the planet, but also, critically, bred to be family companions, to sleep with children on cold nights, to protect villages from predators, to be, in essence, both warriors and guardians. Robert found Kodiak at a specialized breeder in Wasilla, Alaska. There was a litter of 6 puppies, all healthy, all beautiful, with that characteristic gray and white coat of the breed. But there was one who stood out, a male who weighed slightly more than his siblings, with intense amber-colored eyes that seemed to evaluate Robert when he approached. Robert knelt in front of the puppy. The puppy, only 8 weeks old, walked directly toward him, not with the playful clumsiness of his brothers, but with deliberate step. He sat in front of Robert. He looked directly into his eyes for a long moment, and then he put his little paw on Robert's shoe. It was a simple gesture, but for Robert, who had worked with animals for 20 years, it was clear communication. This dog was choosing Robert as much as Robert was choosing him. Robert knew in that moment he'd found not just a dog. He'd found a family member. He named him Kodiak, after Kodiak Island in Alaska, after the Kodiak bears, the largest grizzlies in the world. It was a powerful name. A name Robert hoped would give the dog the presence necessary to deter threats. He couldn't know then how prophetically appropriate that name would be. Kodiak grew fast. At 6 months, he weighed 50 pounds. At a year, 70. At 2 years, he'd reached his adult weight of 90 pounds, all dense muscle under thick fur, designed to insulate against Arctic's deadly cold. But what impressed Robert wasn't Kodiak's physical size. It was his intelligence. Kodiak learned basic commands in weeks. He learned advanced commands in months. He learned to differentiate between wildlife that was dangerous, bears and moose, and wildlife that wasn't, deer and squirrels. He learned the family's routines. He knew when Robert would go out to check his cameras. He knew when Sarah would work in her darkroom, developing photographs. He knew with unsettling precision when something was out of place. A strange scent on the wind. A sound that didn't belong, a subtle change in bird behavior that indicated a predator was near. Kodiak became not just their dog, he became their early warning system, their protector, their family. And then Thomas arrived. Sarah got pregnant in the winter of 2018, gave birth in September of 2019. Thomas Robert Miller, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfectly healthy, with blue eyes like his father and blonde hair like his mother. Robert had some concerns about how Kodiak, now 5 years old, would react to a baby. Some dogs get jealous, some become protectively aggressive, some simply get confused and avoid the baby completely. Kodiak did none of that. When Sarah came home from the hospital in Anchorage with Thomas wrapped in blankets, Kodiak approached slowly. Robert watched him carefully, ready to intervene if necessary. Kodiak sniffed the baby gently. He licked his little hand with extreme delicacy. And then he lay down next to the bassinet where they'd placed Thomas, put his large head on his paws, and simply watched. That night, when Thomas cried at 2 a.m, Kodiak was at his bedroom door before Robert or Sarah could get up. When Thomas had colic and cried for hours, Kodiak stayed next to him, his calm presence seeming to soothe the baby in ways nothing else could. The first 3 years of Thomas's life were inseparable from Kodiak. When Thomas learned to crawl, he crawled toward Kodiak. When he learned to walk, his first unsteady steps were toward where Kodiak was lying. When he learned to talk, one of his first words, right after Mama and Dada, was Cody, his childish version of Kodiak. They slept together. Thomas in his small bed, Kodiak on the floor right beside. If Thomas fell out of bed during the night, something that happened several times, Kodiak was there, his padded body cushioning the fall. If Thomas had nightmares and cried, Kodiak put his paw on the boy's chest until he calmed down. It was a relationship that went beyond child and pet. It was brotherhood. It was family in its purest form. And Kodiak took his role with absolute seriousness. Robert noticed Kodiak behaved differently when Thomas was near, more alert, more cautious. His ears always turning, listening for any potential threat, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter, as if he'd taken a silent oath, as if he'd decided Thomas was his responsibility, his purpose, his mission. The summer of 2022 was one of the hottest on record in Alaska. Temperatures reached 80 degrees Fahrenheit, almost tropical by Alaska standards. This meant something critical for wildlife. It meant the salmon were spawning early, and when salmon spawn early, bears come out early too. Grizzly bears in Alaska spend winter in hibernation. They lose up to 1/3 of their body weight. When they emerge in spring, they're hungry in a way that's hard to understand. A grizzly can eat 90 pounds of salmon in a single day. He needs to consume more than 4,000 calories daily just to maintain his weight. 5,000 to gain weight before the next winter. This makes them incredibly dangerous. A hungry grizzly bear isn't afraid of humans. He's not afraid of anything. He only has one imperative: eat. And anything that stands between a hungry grizzly and his food is in mortal danger. Robert knew this. That's why he'd established strict rules for the family. Never go out without his rifle. Never go out alone during dusk or dawn when bears are most active. Always make noise when walking, talk loudly, carry bear bells. And above all, keep Thomas within the safe perimeter near the cabin where Kodiak could watch him. September 15th, 2022 began like any other day. Robert woke up at 6 a.m, made coffee, checked his remote trail cameras from his computer, verifying what wildlife had passed through his monitored trails during the night. He saw a female moose with her calf, a red fox, and worryingly, a large grizzly bear, probably a male based on his size, at 3:47 in the early morning. The camera captured him, following the stream that ran through their property. He was heading west, toward their cabin. Robert frowned. It wasn't unusual to see bears, but this one was large, and large males are territorial, aggressive, dangerous. He made a mental note to be extra careful that day. Sarah woke up at 7. Thomas at 8, like clockwork, shouting, "Mama, Dada, Cody!" With that infinite energy only 3-year-olds possess. They had breakfast together, pancakes with maple syrup, Thomas's favorite. Kodiak, as always, was lying under the table, patiently waiting for the accidental pieces of pancake Thomas dropped. After breakfast, Robert announced he needed to physically check his trail cameras. Some were malfunctioning, probably low batteries. He'd be out maybe 2 hours. Sarah nodded. She'd work on editing photographs in her studio. Thomas would play on the back porch with Kodiak watching him. At 3 in the afternoon, everything was normal. Thomas was building a tower with his wooden blocks on the back porch. Kodiak was lying 3 meters away, his usual position where he could see both Thomas and the surrounding forest. Sarah was inside, focused on editing a series of eagle photographs she'd taken the week before. Robert was 150 meters away, on the East Trail, replacing batteries in a trail camera. 3:40 in the afternoon. Thomas finished his tower. He looked at Kodiak. "Cody, come see," he said in his high toddler voice. Kodiak got up, walked to the tower, sniffed it dutifully as if he were genuinely impressed by Thomas's engineering. Thomas laughed. That sound, Sarah would later say, was the last time she heard her son laugh completely carefree. 3:41. Thomas saw something at the edge of the clearing. A bird, maybe. A squirrel. Something that captured his 3-year-old attention with the singular intensity young children can manifest. He got up, walked to the edge of the porch, went down the 3 steps, walked toward the forest, only 5 meters, just to see better. Kodiak immediately got up and followed him, as he always did, staying between Thomas and the forest, between Thomas and any potential danger. 3:42. The bear came out of the forest. Later, based on the tracks and forensic investigation, experts would determine the bear had been sleeping less than 50 meters from the cabin. He'd probably arrived the night before, found a comfortable spot under a fallen tree, and fallen asleep after eating a considerable amount of salmon from the stream. The sound of Thomas, his high little voice, woke him up. And when a male grizzly bear is abruptly awakened, especially during feeding season when he's in resource protection mode, his first reaction is aggression. The bear rose up on his hind legs. Robert, later, would estimate his height at 8 feet, his weight at 450 to 500 pounds, his claws at 4 inches. This wasn't an average bear. This was one of the largest grizzlies Robert had seen in 30 years in Alaska, and he was directly in front of his 3-year-old son. Thomas screamed, that shrill scream of pure terror. Robert heard at 150 meters. Thomas did what any 3-year-old would do. He ran toward the cabin, toward safety, toward Mommy. But he tripped. His little legs weren't coordinated enough to run in panic over uneven terrain. He fell. He was on the ground, looking up at the bear now looming over him. And it was in that moment, in that precise instant, that would last less than 2 seconds, but would define everything that came after, that Kodiak made his decision. Kodiak had options. He could have run toward the cabin, barked frantically to alert Sarah. He could have run to where Robert was, guiding him back. He could have even, and this is what most dogs would have done, run to save himself. Malamutes are intelligent dogs. Kodiak knew what a grizzly bear was. He'd seen bears before, at safe distance. He knew the danger they represented. He knew with the instinctive certainty all animals possess that fighting a 450-pound grizzly meant almost certain death. But Kodiak also knew something else. He knew Thomas was on the ground. He knew the bear was seconds from attacking. He knew that if he didn't do something now, the boy he'd cared for since he was a baby would die. And for Kodiak, there was no choice. There was only one thing to do: attack, fight, and if necessary, die. Kodiak attacked the grizzly bear with the ferocity of an animal 3 times his size. He launched himself not at the bear's legs, where a smaller dog might try to bite and flee. He launched himself directly at the bear's throat, using his own 90-pound weight as a projectile, his 2-inch teeth seeking the jugular artery. The bear roared, a sound so loud Sarah heard it inside the cabin through 20-centimeter thick log walls. The bear came down from his hind legs, trying to shake off the dog, but Kodiak wouldn't let go. His jaws, evolutionarily designed to hold heavy loads during long distances, were clamped with more than 300 pounds of bite force on the bear's neck. He wasn't causing fatal damage. A grizzly bear has skin almost an inch thick, massive neck muscles designed to flip 300-pound rocks, but Kodiak was causing pain and distraction. And that was enough. The bear, temporarily forgetting Thomas, focused all his attention on Kodiak. He raised his massive right paw, claws extended, and struck the dog with enough force to instantly kill a deer. The blow hit Kodiak on his left side. Robert, who was running toward the scene, heard the impact. He heard Kodiak's cry of pain, and he heard something else that would make his stomach turn. The sound of ribs breaking. Kodiak was thrown 2 meters through the air. He landed heavily. Any other dog would have been finished, would have fled if he could still run, or would have stayed on the ground fatally wounded. Kodiak got up. Blood dripped from his mouth. His ribs on his left side were visibly caved in. But he got up, and he attacked again. This time was different. This time Kodiak wasn't going for the throat. He was going for the bear's front legs, trying to unbalance him. It was a pack-hunting tactic that wolves, dogs' distant cousins, used to bring down large prey. Bite the legs, cause pain, make the larger animal fall, and then, when he's vulnerable, go for the throat. But Kodiak was alone. There was no pack. There was only him, a 3-year-old boy who desperately needed 30 more seconds to get to safety, and a bear who weighed 5 times what Kodiak weighed. The bear turned, faster than any animal that size should be able to move. He caught Kodiak with both paws, like a boxer grabbing an opponent, and he squeezed. Kodiak howled, not the howl of a dog calling his pack, the howl of an animal in extreme agony. Robert was 50 meters away. He raised his rifle, but he couldn't shoot. The bear and Kodiak were too close. An errant shot would hit Kodiak. A shot that missed the bear but passed through could hit Thomas, who was still only 5 meters away, paralyzed with terror. Robert shouted. He shouted with all the strength of his lungs, hoping the sound would scare the bear, make him release Kodiak and flee. Grizzly bears normally avoid confrontation with humans when they're outnumbered, but this bear was in fight mode now, his adrenaline flowing, his territorial instinct activated. Robert's shout only made him squeeze harder. There was a sickening sound, the sound of more ribs breaking, the sound of internal organs being crushed. Kodiak stopped howling. His body went limp. The bear, satisfied the threat was neutralized, dropped him. Kodiak hit the ground. He didn't move. Robert reached the clearing. He raised his rifle, aimed at the bear who was now turning again toward Thomas. Robert squeezed the trigger. The rifle, a Winchester Model 70 and 300 Win Mag caliber, one of the most powerful rounds for bear hunting, roared. The bullet hit the bear in the right shoulder, penetrating deep into the muscle but missing the heart by inches. The bear roared, turned toward Robert, evaluating this new threat. Robert chambered another round, aimed again. But before he could shoot, the bear made his decision. He'd been wounded. He'd been confronted by a human with a weapon. His instincts finally told him to flee. He turned and ran toward the forest, blood staining his brown fur. He disappeared among the trees at astonishing speed for such a massive animal. Robert didn't pursue him. He didn't care about the bear now. He dropped his rifle and ran toward Thomas. His son was still on the ground, his eyes very wide, his small body trembling. Robert picked him up, checking him for injuries. Nothing, not a scratch. The bear had never touched him. Kodiak had protected him completely. "You're okay, you're okay, you're okay," Robert repeated, his own voice breaking. Thomas clung to his father, sobbing. "Cody, Daddy, Cody!" Robert turned to where Kodiak had fallen. The dog was lying on his side. Blood was coming from his mouth, his nose. His breathing was shallow, irregular. Robert put Thomas on the ground, told him to run to the cabin to tell Mommy to come with the medical kit. Thomas ran, his little legs finally finding coordination born of fear and adrenaline. Robert knelt next to Kodiak. He put his hands that had treated thousands of injured animals during his career, on the dog's chest. He felt broken ribs, multiple, maybe 6, maybe more. He felt blood accumulating, probably a punctured lung. He felt Kodiak's heartbeat, erratic, weak. "No, no, no," Robert whispered. "Stay with me, boy, stay with me." Kodiak opened his eyes. Those amber eyes Robert had first seen 8 years ago at a breeder in Wasilla. And in those eyes, Robert saw something that would make him cry later every time he remembered it. He saw peace. He saw satisfaction. As if Kodiak knew he'd done his job. As if he knew Thomas was safe, and that was all that mattered. Sarah came running, the medical kit in her hands, Thomas clinging to her leg. She saw Kodiak, saw the blood, and she knew. Robert and Sarah worked on Kodiak for 45 minutes before the veterinary medical helicopter Robert had called arrived. They tried to stabilize his breathing. They wrapped his chest to immobilize the ribs. They inserted an IV line. They did everything they could with limited emergency supplies. Kodiak remained conscious the entire time. His head turned slightly toward where Thomas was sitting 1.5 meters away, watching with tear-filled eyes. The boy, who had never seen Cody hurt, who had never fully understood that Cody was mortal, whispered, "I'm sorry, Cody. I'm sorry," as if it were his fault. As if his 3-year-old curiosity, his innocent desire to see a bird or squirrel closer, had caused all this. The helicopter landed in the clearing at 4:32, 50 minutes after the attack. The emergency veterinary team, 2 veterinarians and a technician, jumped out even before the blade stopped. They assessed Kodiak quickly, professionally. Their faces said everything before they spoke. "We need to get him to Anchorage," said the lead veterinarian, Dr. Lisa Chen, whom Robert knew from conferences. "He has massive internal trauma, collapsed lung, probable bleeding in the abdominal cavity, multiple rib fractures. We need surgery, now." They loaded Kodiak onto a specially designed stretcher. Robert started to climb in with them. "Only 1 passenger," said the pilot. "Weight restrictions." Robert looked at Sarah. She nodded. "Go. Bring Cody back to us." Robert climbed in. Thomas screamed, "Daddy! Cody!" Sarah held him, crying too, as the helicopter ascended, its roar drowning out everything else. The flight to Anchorage Animal Medical Center took 18 minutes. 18 minutes during which Dr. Chen and her team kept Kodiak alive by sheer medical willpower. Pumping tight blood, monitoring his heart, adjusting oxygen pressure when his breathing failed. "He's a fighter," Dr. Chen said. "I've seen dogs with half this trauma give up. He keeps fighting. He has something to live for," Robert responded, his voice hoarse. "He has a 3-year-old boy who needs him." They arrived at the center at 4:50. They rolled Kodiak directly into surgery. Robert wasn't allowed in. He sat in the waiting room, still covered with Kodiak's blood, still shaking from adrenaline. He called Sarah. She and Thomas were on their way, driving the 100 miles from their cabin. They'd arrive in 2 hours. "How is he?" Sarah asked, her voice loaded with contained emotion. "In surgery," Robert said. "Lisa Chen is the best. If anyone can save him, it's her." But even as he said the words, Robert knew the statistics. He knew the brutal reality of massive trauma in animals. The survival rate for dogs with internal injuries of this magnitude was less than 20%. And that statistic assumed the dog got to surgery quickly, which they'd accomplished. It assumed the dog was young and healthy, which Kodiak wasn't completely. He was 8 years old, considered senior for a large Malamute. And it assumed the dog wanted to live, that he had the will to fight. That, at least, Robert knew Kodiak had. The question was whether it would be enough. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. Sarah and Thomas arrived at 7, found Robert still in the waiting room, staring at the wall. Thomas ran toward him. "Daddy? Where's Cody?" "The doctors are helping him, champ," Robert said, lifting his son. "They're helping him get better." Thomas nodded, completely trusting his father. 3-year-olds don't understand death. They don't understand permanence. They think everything broken can be fixed, every wound can heal, everything lost can be found. Robert desperately wished Thomas could keep that innocence a little longer. At 9:14 in the evening, Dr. Chen came out. She still wore her surgical gown stained with blood. She removed her mask. She approached Robert, and he knew from the expression on her face before she spoke. "We did everything we could," she began, "and those 5 words are what every pet owner fears, because everything that comes after them is devastation. We repaired the collapsed lung. We stopped the internal bleeding. We set 6 ribs. We removed the spleen, which was too damaged to save. We transfused 2 units of blood." She paused. "But the damage to his kidneys are failing. One is completely non-functional. The other is operating at 20%. We can put him on dialysis. We can keep him alive temporarily. But his prognosis..." She stopped, searching for the right words. She didn't find them. She only said softly, "It's poor." "How long?" Robert asked, his voice barely a whisper. "With aggressive treatment, dialysis, intensive care, maybe 3 months. Maybe 6 if we're lucky." And she put her hand on Robert's arm. "It won't be a good quality of life. He'll be in the hospital most of the time, in pain, confused about why he can't go home, why he can't see Thomas." Robert collapsed. He literally fell into his chair, his head in his hands, sobbing in a way Sarah had never seen in 15 years of marriage, sobbing like a child, sobbing because he knew what he had to decide. And he knew there was no good option. There were only 2 kinds of terrible. "Can I see him?" he finally asked. "Of course," Dr. Chen said. "He's in recovery. Still sedated but conscious. You can go in." Robert looked at Sarah. "Take Thomas home. He doesn't need to be here for this." "Robert," Sarah began. "Please," he said, "please. Just take him home, put him to bed, give him the best night's sleep you can. Tomorrow will be difficult." Sarah nodded, tears running down her cheeks. She took Thomas, who protested, "But I want to see Cody." "Tomorrow, honey," Sarah lied. "You'll see Cody tomorrow." He watched them leave. Then he followed Dr. Chen to the recovery wing. Kodiak was lying in a large cage specially designed for dogs his size. Tubes came out of him, an IV line in his front paw, a drainage tube from his chest, monitors connected to his heart. The constant beeping of the heart rate monitor was the only sound in the quiet room. Robert opened the cage door. He knelt next to his dog. He put his hand on Kodiak's head. "Hey, boy," he whispered. Kodiak opened his eyes. With visible effort, he turned his head to look at Robert. His tail, that thick tail that normally wagged with such energy, moved weakly. Once, twice. Robert felt his heart break again. "You did good, Cody," Robert said, his voice breaking. "You saved Thomas. You kept him safe. You're the bravest, most loyal dog that ever existed." Kodiak looked at him, and Robert saw something in those amber eyes. He saw exhaustion. He saw pain. But he also saw something else. He saw acceptance, as if Kodiak knew what was coming, as if he was at peace with it. Robert stayed with Kodiak for 3 hours, talking to him, petting him, telling him stories about Thomas, about all the moments they'd shared, about how much the family loved him. At midnight, Dr. Chen returned. "Robert," she said softly, "you need to decide. Every hour that passes, he suffers more." Robert nodded. He knew. He'd known from the moment she came out of surgery. Can he wait until tomorrow? I need Thomas to say goodbye." Dr. Chen hesitated. "That's another 10 hours. I can keep him comfortable. But Robert, it will be difficult. For Kodiak. And for Thomas." "I know," Robert said. "But Thomas needs this. He needs to say goodbye. He deserves that." Sarah brought Thomas to the hospital at 9 in the morning on September 16th. She'd spent the entire night awake, crying silently while Thomas slept. She tried to find the words to explain to a 3-year-old that his best friend, his guardian, his brother in everything but blood, was dying. There were no words. Some things are too big, too terrible for language. You can only experience them. You can only go through them. Thomas entered the recovery room, with Sarah holding his hand. He saw Kodiak in the cage. "Cody!" he shouted with that pure joy only young children can manifest. He ran toward the cage. Robert stopped him gently. "Sweetheart," Robert said, kneeling at Thomas's eye level, "Cody is very sick. He got hurt yesterday saving you from the bear. The doctors helped him, but he's still very hurt." Thomas frowned. "But he'll get better, right?" "Cody is strong. Cody is very strong," Robert agreed, tears already filling his eyes. "The strongest dog I know. But sometimes, even the strongest dogs, sometimes they get hurt so badly they can't get better." Thomas processed this with simple 3-year-old logic. "So we put a bandage on him?" "It's not that kind of hurt, champ," Robert said gently. "It's hurt on the inside, and we can't fix it." "Why not?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising, frustration and fear mixing. "You fix animals. That's what you do." "I wish I could fix Cody," Robert said, sobbing openly now. "I'd give anything, but I can't. And Cody is very tired. He hurts a lot, and the best thing we can do now is let him rest." Thomas didn't fully understand. How could he? But he understood enough. He understood something terrible was happening. He began to cry, not the loud sobs of a tantrum, but silent tears of genuine sadness. "Can I say goodbye?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Robert said. "You can say goodbye." Robert opened the cage door. Thomas climbed in, careful of the tubes, and lay down next to Kodiak, exactly as he'd done hundreds of nights at home. He put his little head against Kodiak's fur. "I love you, Cody," he whispered. "You're my best friend. Thank you for saving me from the bear. I'm sorry you got hurt. I'm so sorry." Kodiak, with the last bit of energy he had left, lifted his head. He licked Thomas's hand, once, gently, and then he put his head back down, his final task completed. The euthanasia was performed at 10:23 in the morning, September 16th, 2022. Dr. Chen administered the sedative first to ensure Kodiak felt nothing. Robert and Sarah were there. Thomas too, because they felt he had the right to be present, even though he didn't fully understand. "It's like falling asleep," Dr. Chen explained to Thomas. "Cody is going to fall asleep, and when he falls asleep, his pain will stop, and his spirit will go to a place where he can run and play again without pain." Thomas nodded, trusting the adults around him to guide him through this. Dr. Chen inserted the needle into the IV line. "Goodbye, Kodiak," she said softly. "You were a good dog. The best dog." She pressed the plunger. The medication, a combination of phenobarbital and pentobarbital, entered Kodiak's bloodstream. It acted in seconds. Kodiak's heart, which had beaten faithfully for 8 years, through cold Alaska nights, through mountain adventures, through silent vigils over a sleeping child, beat its last time. The monitor emitted a flat tone. Kodiak was gone. Thomas cried. Sarah cried. Robert cried in a way he hadn't cried since his own father died. Dr. Chen left the room discreetly, giving them privacy. They stayed with Kodiak for an hour, touching his fur, telling him how much they loved him, thanking him for his sacrifice. Eventually they had to leave. They had to leave Kodiak's body, though they carried his memory, his love, his legacy with them. They chose cremation. The ashes were returned 3 days later in a beautiful wooden box with a plaque that said, "Kodiak, 2014-2022, Hero and Guardian." Robert scattered some of the ashes in the clearing behind their cabin, where Kodiak had fought his last battle. He kept the rest in a place of honor above the fireplace. Next to it was a photo of Kodiak and Thomas, taken 6 months earlier, both smiling, Thomas's arm wrapped around Kodiak's neck, Kodiak's tail wagging in a blur of motion. The photo captured everything they'd meant to each other. Unconditional love, simple joy, absolute trust. Kodiak's story reached local news first, then national, then international. It was covered by CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. The security camera video Robert had installed, showing the full 7 minutes from when the bear appeared until he fled, was viewed by more than 50 million people in the first 2 weeks. People were moved in ways they couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't just that a dog had saved a child. Dogs do that more often than is reported. It was the deliberate sacrifice. It was how Kodiak, after being struck with enough force to break multiple ribs, had gotten up and attacked again. How he'd never fled. How he'd fought until he literally couldn't fight anymore. It was the pure love that demonstrated. Love that didn't calculate cost. Love that didn't ask what's in it for me. Love that simply said, you matter more than I do, and I'll act on that truth, no matter the price. Animal welfare organizations contacted Robert. They wanted to create a foundation in Kodiak's name, dedicated to training dogs for search and rescue, for family protection, for service with veterans with PTSD. Robert agreed. The Kodiak Foundation was established 3 months later, with Sarah as director. In its first year, it trained 35 dogs. By year 3, 150. Each dog wore a collar with a small plaque that said, "In honor of Kodiak, hero and guardian." The town of Anchorage erected a statue downtown, a bronze Malamute in protective stance, looking forward with determination. The plaque at the base said, "In memory of Kodiak, who taught us that true love knows no limits." 2014-2022. The unveiling ceremony was attended by more than 2,000 people. Thomas, now 4 years old, placed flowers at the base of the statue. Several months after the attack, Robert contacted animal behavior researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He wanted to understand, from a scientific perspective, what Kodiak had done. The researchers, led by Dr. Jennifer Hartman, specialist in canine cognition, studied the video extensively. What Kodiak did defies much of what we thought we knew about canine decision-making, Dr. Hartman explained to Robert during a meeting in her office. Dogs have pack protection instincts, yes. They'll defend their territory, defend members of their family from perceived threats. But there's almost always a calculation of risk versus reward. A dog will evaluate the threat, evaluate his chances, and make decisions accordingly. But Kodiak, she shook her head in amazement, Kodiak made no risk calculation. The video clearly shows that after the first strike from the bear, which would have broken Kodiak's ribs and caused significant pain, Kodiak hesitated. For exactly 0.8 seconds, visible in the video at reduced speed, Kodiak stopped. And in that 0.8 seconds, we can see his head turn toward the forest, the escape route. He considered fleeing, but he didn't, Robert said. No, Dr. Hartman agreed. Instead, he looked back at Thomas, and then he attacked again, which suggests Kodiak made a conscious, deliberate choice. He chose to fight even though he knew he was hurt, even though he knew he might die. He chose Thomas over his own survival. That's not just instinct, she continued. That's something deeper. Some would call it love. Others might call it duty. I call it evidence that canine cognition, particularly in breeds bred for thousands of years to work closely with humans, can reach levels of empathy, sacrifice, and moral decision-making we previously attributed only to humans. Dr. Hartman's study was published in the Journal of Comparative Psychology with the title Deliberate Altruism in Canis Familiaris, a case study. It was cited in dozens of subsequent academic papers. Kodiak, unknowingly, had become not just a hero. He'd become a scientific case study, evidence that the bond between humans and dogs, forged during 15,000 years of coevolution, had created something truly remarkable. A species that could not only love another species, but could choose to sacrifice itself for that other species. Thomas grew up knowing Kodiak had given his life for him. It was a heavy weight for such a young child to carry. Some days he asked, "Mommy, why did Cody have to die? Why couldn't the bear just go away?" Sarah, after consulting with a child psychologist, developed an answer she repeated every time Thomas asked. Cody chose to protect you because he loved you more than anything in the world. And when you love someone like that, you'd do anything to keep them safe. Cody didn't think it was bad. He thought it was his purpose, and he fulfilled his purpose. "But I miss him," Thomas would say, his eyes filling with tears even years later. "I know, honey," Sarah would respond, holding him. "We all miss him, but Cody is still with us. Every time we're brave when we're scared, that's Cody. Every time we protect someone we love, that's Cody. Every time we choose to do the right thing, even though it's hard, that's Cody. He taught us how to love that way, and as long as we remember that, he's never really gone." When Thomas turned 7, Robert and Sarah felt he was ready. They asked him if he wanted another dog. Thomas hadn't mentioned wanting a dog in the 4 years since Kodiak's death. When they asked, his response surprised them. "Would it be a Malamute?" he asked. "It could be," Robert said. "Do you want it to be?" Thomas thought for a long time. Finally, he nodded. Cody was a Malamute, and Cody was the best. So if we have another dog, it should be a Malamute too. To honor Cody, they found a breeder. The same breeder in Wasilla, where Robert had found Kodiak more than a decade ago. She'd followed the story, had cried when she heard about Kodiak's sacrifice. "I have something special for you," she said when they arrived. "One of my females had a litter 10 weeks ago. The alpha male of the litter, Robert, he looks like Kodiak, not just physically, in temperament. Watch." She led Robert, Sarah, and Thomas to the yard where the puppies were. There were 7. 6 were playing, rolling over each other, nibbling ears, behaving like normal puppies, but one was sitting slightly apart, watching. His eyes, amber-colored like Kodiak's, tracked everything. When Thomas entered the yard, this puppy got up. He walked directly to the boy. He sat in front of him, and then, in a gesture that made Robert and Sarah look at each other in amazement, the puppy put his paw on Thomas's shoe. Exactly what Kodiak had done with Robert 11 years ago. "What will we name him?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. Thomas didn't hesitate. "Guardian," he said, "because that's what Cody was. A guardian, and this one will be a guardian too." Guardian grew up being almost the exact copy of Kodiak in temperament, gentle but alert, playful but protective, and absolutely devoted to Thomas. The two became inseparable, in the same way Thomas and Kodiak had been. When Thomas had nightmares, sometimes still about a bear in the forest, Guardian was there, his calming presence dispelling the fear. When Thomas had his first day of school, anxious about leaving his parents, it was Guardian who walked with him to the school bus, sat and watched until the bus drove away. It was as if Kodiak, through some method we couldn't fully understand, had sent a successor, a new guardian, for the child he'd protected with his life. Years passed. Thomas grew. At 10, he wrote an essay about Kodiak for school, titled My Hero. It won a state award. At 14, he volunteered at the Kodiak Foundation, helping train service dogs. At 18, he applied and was accepted to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. His declared major, wildlife biology, the same field as his father. His stated goal, to understand and protect the delicate balance between humans and animals in Alaska. "Kodiak gave me my life," he told Sarah the night before leaving for college. "Now I want to spend my life making sure his sacrifice meant something, making sure humans and animals can coexist, that tragedies like what almost happened don't have to happen." Robert Miller retired at 65. He spent his retirement years working with the Kodiak Foundation, sharing Kodiak's story with schools, youth groups, anyone who would listen. "People need to hear this story," he said during an interview for Alaska Magazine on his 70th birthday. "In a world where we often feel divided, where we sometimes forget what it means to love without condition, to sacrifice without asking what's in it for me, Kodiak's story reminds us. It reminds us that true love, the kind of love Kodiak showed that day, doesn't make calculations. It doesn't weigh cost against benefit. It simply acts. It simply loves. It simply protects. And if we can learn that lesson from a dog, maybe we can apply it in our own lives, with our families, with our communities, with our world. Sarah Miller continued her photography, but changed her focus. Instead of landscapes and wildlife, she began photographing working dogs, search and rescue dogs, therapy dogs, police dogs, service dogs for veterans. She compiled her photographs into a coffee table book titled Guardians, Dogs Who Serve. The first photo in the book was of Kodiak, taken 6 months before his death, sitting on their cabin porch, looking toward the forest, always vigilant. The proceeds from the book, which sold more than 100,000 copies, were donated to the Kodiak Foundation. On September 15th, every year, the anniversary of the attack, the Miller family makes a pilgrimage to the clearing behind their cabin. Now Thomas is a grown man, 26 years old, with his own family, his wife, Emma, and his 2-year-old daughter, Lily. They bring flowers, they bring candles, and they bring Guardian, now 19 years old for a Malamute but still strong, still protective. They stand in the place where Kodiak fought, where Kodiak bled, where Kodiak made his decision, and they tell the story again. For Lily, who is too young to fully understand, but who listens with wide eyes. For Emma, who never met Kodiak, but who loves the memory of him because she sees how he shaped the man she married. For Guardian, who sits solemnly, as if he understands the gravity of the moment. And for themselves, because some stories need to be told again and again. Not to remind us of the past, but to guide us toward the future, to remind us what kind of love is possible, what kind of sacrifice exists, what kind of loyalty defines not just good dogs, but good lives. Thank you, Cody, Thomas says every year, his voice carried by Alaska's wind. Thank you for giving me life. Thank you for teaching me what it means to love without limit. I promise to live in a way that honors your sacrifice. I promise to be the kind of person who was worth saving. And in the silence that follows, as the wind whispers through the pines and the stream murmurs its eternal song, you can almost feel a presence. You can almost imagine a large Malamute with grey and white fur and amber eyes watching you from the edge of the clearing. You can almost hear his steady breathing, his quiet patience, his unbreakable love. Kodiak, the Alaskan Malamute who attacked a grizzly bear to save a 3-year-old boy. Kodiak, who chose to fight even though he knew he might die. Kodiak, who paid the highest price to pay the debt of love. His story isn't just about a brave dog, it's about all of us, about the choices we make when everything is at stake, about whether we choose love or fear, sacrifice or self-preservation, duty or convenience. Kodiak chose love. He chose sacrifice. He chose duty, and in doing so he proved that the bond between humans and animals, forged over millennia, refined through generations, isn't just about companionship or utility. It's about something deeper, something more sacred. It's about family. It's about purpose. It's about love that transcends instinct, that reaches something almost divine in its purity and power. Kodiak's legacy lives on, in Thomas, who grew up to protect the wildlife that almost cost him his life, in the Kodiak Foundation, which trains hundreds of dogs each year to serve and protect, in Guardian and the thousands of Malamutes around the world whose owners know his story and see in their own dogs the same potential for heroism. And in each of us who hears his story and asks ourselves, if I face that moment, that decisive instant where I could choose my safety or that of someone I love, what would I choose? Would I be brave enough, loyal enough, loving enough? Kodiak teaches us that yes, we can be, that kind of love isn't just possible, it's attainable, it's within us, waiting for the moment when we'll be called to act. Thank you, Kodiak, for your service, for your sacrifice, for showing us the kind of love we should all strive to give. May your memory inspire generations. May your legacy continue forever. And may everything you fought to protect that day in Alaska's forest grow to live lives as full, as meaningful, as impactful as yours was. Rest in peace, Guardian. You've earned your rest, your watch has ended, and the boy you protected grows strong, guided by the love you showed, living the life you gave. That's the greatest tribute. That's the greatest honor. That's the eternal legacy of Kodiak, the dog who faced a bear, not with hate or anger, but with pure love. And in that love, he found the courage to do the impossible, to achieve the miraculous, to become legend. Before saying goodbye, I need you to do one more thing. Go down to the comments and tell me if this story moved you. Share your own experience with a dog you loved, a moment when your pet showed you loyalty you won't forget. Because these stories, these truths about the bond between humans and animals need to be shared. They need to be celebrated. If you felt something during these last 60 minutes, if a tear fell, if your heart tightened, then like this video, subscribe to this channel because we bring these stories every week. Real stories of heroism, loyalty and love that restore your faith in the goodness that exists in this world. Share this video with someone who loves dogs. Share with someone who needs to remember that true love still exists. And if you can, consider making a donation to the Kodiak Foundation. The link is in the description. Every penny goes to training dogs that save lives, protect families, and honor Kodiak's memory. See you in the next video. And remember, when you look at your own dog today, when you see those eyes looking at you with unconditional love, remember Kodiak. Remember that the love you see is real. It's powerful. And it's worth it, every moment, every sacrifice, every tear, because love like Kodiak showed isn't common. It's extraordinary, it's miraculous, it's eternal. Semper Fidelis, always faithful. That was Kodiak. That's the legacy. That's the standard we should all aspire to. Goodbye, and may you find your own Kodiak in your life. And when you do, love him with everything you have, because that's what Kodiak taught us. That's what Kodiak gave us. That's what Kodiak was. Pure love until the end.